When 17-year-old Alex Carter and his friends walked into the mall that afternoon, none of them imagined a single reckless choice would turn their quiet town into a scene of chaos, leaving lives shattered in the blink of an eye. The day began like any other in the small, sleepy town, with sunlight spilling across quiet streets and the faint hum of morning traffic blending with the chirping of birds. Residents went about their routines, unaware that the calm would soon be shattered by a sudden act of recklessness. The local mall, usually a place of casual shopping and teenage hangouts, was alive with the laughter and chatter of young people. Groups of teens lingered near the parking lots, sharing snacks, checking phones, and daring each other to take small risks, little realizing how one impulsive decision could ignite a chain of events that would change lives forever. Among them was a 17-year-old whose restless energy set him apart from the others. He had always been drawn to adventure, though in a way that often ignored consequences. On that day, his eyes scanned the row of parked cars with a mixture of curiosity and daring, seeking an opportunity that would satisfy the restless thrill he carried inside. The afternoon sun reflected off the windshields, catching his gaze and planting an idea that would soon spiral beyond his control. The car he targeted was unremarkable, a mid-sized sedan, nothing flashy, but it represented something more than transportation. To him, it symbolized freedom, power, and a break from the constraints of ordinary teenage life. In a single, impulsive move, he approached the vehicle, glancing around to make sure no one was watching too closely. With swift, calculated motions, he gained access and slid into the driver's seat, heart racing as adrenaline surged through his veins. Security cameras at the mall captured every second, recording the theft with stark clarity, though no one at the time grasped how this moment would unfold into chaos. The teens, who had been idly chatting nearby, barely registered what had happened at first. Some laughed nervously, assuming it was a joke or a stunt for social media. Others froze, eyes wide, realizing too late that the situation was real. The stolen car's engine roared to life, breaking the afternoon silence and startling the nearby shoppers. It rolled forward, tires crunching against the asphalt, and then surged into the street, leaving a trail of shocked onlookers behind. The suddenness of the act made it impossible for anyone to intervene immediately, and the teen, consumed by excitement and fear in equal measure, pushed the car to speed away. As the vehicle disappeared from view, a wave of tension spread through the crowd. Calls were already being made to local authorities, and the first reports of the carjacking reached the police department within minutes. Patrol units began mobilizing, and a sense of urgency gripped the officers who realized that a high-stakes situation was unfolding in a place that had rarely seen such incidents. Meanwhile, the stolen car weaved through side streets, each turn fueled by the teen's mixture of thrill and panic. Every passing second intensified the sense of danger, not only for the teen himself, but for the unsuspecting residents whose routines would soon be disrupted. In those moments, the quiet town, which had always felt safe and predictable, began to transform into a landscape of uncertainty and fear. What began as a seemingly minor act of teenage rebellion was already taking on the weight of something far more serious. The stolen car was no longer just a vehicle. It had become a symbol of the unforeseen consequences that could arise from a single, impulsive choice. The day's ordinary calm had been shattered, replaced by the simmering tension of a story that was only just beginning. The teen's heart pounded as he accelerated, unaware of the full scope of what he had set into motion, unaware that the rest of the town was about to experience a day they would never forget. The stolen car hurtled through the streets at a speed that made the surroundings blur. The teen's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white, as the adrenaline surged through his body. Each intersection approached like a challenge, each turn a test of control he barely possessed. The sirens in the distance grew louder, signaling that the authorities were already on his trail. Panic and thrill battled inside him, each fueling his reckless decisions. He swerved around parked cars, narrowly missing pedestrians who had the misfortune of stepping too close to the curb. The vehicle bounced over potholes and scraped against the edges of the road, leaving marks in its wake. Behind him, the police responded with urgency. Patrol cars activated their sirens and lights, racing to intercept the stolen vehicle. Officers calculated every turn, predicting the teen's movements as best as they could. Radio calls crackled with information about his location and the direction he was heading. The chase was no longer just about a stolen car. It had become a dangerous game where one wrong move could harm innocent bystanders. The tension in the air was palpable. The quiet suburb now transformed into a theater of chaos. Witnesses watched from windows and sidewalks, hearts pounding, unable to look away as the drama unfolded before them. The teen, inexperienced behind the wheel, attempted to outmaneuver the pursuing patrols. He darted down narrow streets, making sudden turns that sent the car skidding slightly on the pavement. The sound of screeching tires echoed through the neighborhood. Every maneuver increased the risk, yet he seemed unaware of how close he was to disaster. With each passing second, the pursuit escalated, the gap between teen and law enforcement shrinking. His youthful confidence collided with the harsh reality of the situation, and the streets that once seemed familiar now twisted into a dangerous maze. The chase soon left the shopping district and entered residential zones, where parked cars and trees added to the hazards. The teen made a sharp turn onto a narrow street, misjudging the angle and barely avoiding a collision with a mailbox. The vehicle jolted, tires squealing, and for a moment it seemed he might regain control. But the police were relentless, keeping close behind, their presence a constant reminder of the consequences looming ahead. Drivers in nearby streets honked and swerved to avoid the speeding sedan, their movements adding another layer of unpredictability to the chase. As the pursuit continued, the teen's fear began to mix with a sense of defiance. He pushed the car harder, accelerating past stop signs and disregarding red lights, each act amplifying the danger. Onlookers watched in horror as the sedan weaved through intersections, narrowly avoiding collisions that could have ended lives instantly. The adrenaline made time feel distorted, with moments stretching and contracting in the chaos of high speed. For the authorities, the priority was clear: prevent loss of life while attempting to bring the reckless driver to a stop. The streets that had been calm just an hour before were now a blur of flashing lights, spinning tires, and heart-stopping tension. Every decision the teen made drove the pursuit closer to a moment that no one could predict. A climax that loomed just ahead with terrifying inevitability. The chase had already taken a dangerous toll, and the teen's sense of control was slipping with every passing second. The streets he once knew so well now seemed unpredictable, each corner a potential disaster. As he sped toward the highway, a construction site suddenly appeared ahead, its orange cones and heavy equipment cutting through the flow of traffic like obstacles in a maze. Without warning, he swerved to avoid the barriers, tires screeching against the asphalt. Gravel and debris flew into the air, bouncing off the car and scattering across the road. The sedan shuddered from the impact, a jolt that rattled the teen's body and sent a sharp spike of panic through his mind. Behind him, the police adjusted their tactics, mindful of the hazards that had suddenly appeared. Officers communicated quickly over radios, warning each other of the construction zone and the debris that now littered the streets. Every maneuver the teen made became more dangerous as the environment shifted from predictable roads to a landscape of obstacles. The public watched with growing alarm, some stopping in place to record the events on their phones, others stepping aside just in time to avoid being caught in the chaos. The high-speed pursuit had escalated from a reckless act of teenage rebellion into a full-scale threat to anyone in the vicinity. Rain began to fall in light, persistent droplets, slicking the roads and making traction even more difficult to maintain. The teen's confidence wavered as the tires slid slightly over the wet pavement. Brakes squealed, tires spun, and the vehicle swerved uncontrollably for brief moments. He fought to regain composure, but the combination of fear, inexperience, and high speed made it nearly impossible. The sedan bounced over uneven surfaces, scraping curbs and narrowly missing street signs. The construction debris that had once seemed manageable now became an additional hazard as the wet roads turned loose gravel and scattered wood into slipping traps. Every decision carried new consequences. The teen tried to accelerate past patrol cars, but the slick streets slowed his movements and the pursuing officers were gaining ground. Each turn and evasive maneuver tested the limits of both vehicle and driver. Pedestrians froze in shock as the car passed dangerously close, some ducking behind parked vehicles, others gripping the sides of buildings as the roar of the engine filled the air. The sense of urgency and impending disaster hung over the neighborhood like a storm cloud, heavy and inescapable. Despite the escalating danger, the teen pressed on, unwilling to surrender. His mind raced, processing every obstacle too quickly, making split-second decisions that were increasingly reckless. The sedan bounced over a pothole, skidded slightly, and nearly clipped a fence lining the sidewalk. The officers behind him adapted, anticipating his movements and positioning themselves to minimize risk to civilians while attempting to bring the pursuit to an end. Every heartbeat felt amplified, a reminder that one miscalculation could change everything in an instant. The pursuit had evolved into a deadly game of chance, where both driver and law enforcement navigated a web of hazards, uncertain which turn would lead to disaster. With each passing second, the teen's actions carried consequences far greater than he could imagine, and the storm of chaos was only beginning to intensify. The teen's panic reached a peak as the wet streets twisted sharply ahead, lined with houses, mailboxes, and parked cars that offered no room for error. Each turn felt narrower, each maneuver more desperate, and the roar of the engine seemed to echo his racing heartbeat. He gripped the steering wheel with trembling hands, trying to anticipate the next curve, but his inexperience and fear made every decision slightly off. The tires lost traction on a slick patch of rain-soaked asphalt, causing the car to fishtail uncontrollably. For a brief, terrifying moment, it felt as though he had no control at all. The sedan collided with a parked vehicle on the side of the street, the force sending it spinning and slamming against a lamppost. The sound of crushing metal and shattering glass filled the air, a sudden, horrifying explosion of noise that froze anyone watching. Debris flew in every direction, scattering across the street and onto the lawns of nearby homes. The lamppost bent under the impact, its base trembling, while the teen's car came to a twisted, smoking stop. Steam rose from the hood as the engine groaned and sputtered, evidence of the tremendous damage inflicted in those few seconds of chaos. Emergency services arrived within moments, sirens wailing and lights flashing as paramedics and police rushed to the scene. The teen was barely conscious, his body bruised and battered from the violent collision. Blood streaked his face and shards of glass were embedded in his arms and legs. He had survived the initial crash, but the extent of his injuries made it clear that his life had been permanently altered. The officers immediately checked the surrounding area for other victims, aware that the high-speed chase had endangered anyone nearby. Their worst fears were realized when they discovered a bystander, a young parent crossing the street just as the sedan spun out of control, lying on the ground, critically injured. Neighbors who had gathered watched in shock, their faces pale as they took in the scene. The quiet residential street, which had once been a place of ordinary routines and casual walks, was now a tableau of disaster. The teen's reckless decisions had resulted in a calamity that extended beyond himself. The bystanders' cries of pain echoed through the neighborhood, mingling with the distant wail of approaching ambulance sirens. Every detail of the aftermath, the crumpled car, the damaged lamppost, the shattered streetlight, and the injured people, served as a stark reminder of how quickly a single moment of impulsive behavior could escalate into tragedy. Police officers secured the area, directing traffic away from the wreckage and beginning their investigation. Photographs were taken, notes recorded, and eyewitness statements collected, each piece forming a picture of the chain of events that had led to the disaster. The teen, barely conscious, was lifted onto a stretcher and rushed to the hospital, while paramedics attended urgently to the critically injured bystander. The sound of emergency vehicles fading into the distance left behind a street littered with debris, the remnants of a high-speed chase that had spiraled completely out of control. In the quiet that followed, the community began to process what had happened. The collision had been sudden, shocking, and devastating, leaving residents grappling with a sense of disbelief. It was no longer a story of a stolen car or a teenage thrill. It had become a tale of lives irreversibly changed in the span of a few minutes. The consequences of a single reckless act had rippled outward, leaving both the teen and an innocent bystander trapped in a web of pain, injury, and fear, a stark reminder of how quickly a moment of chaos could turn into lasting tragedy. In the days following the accident, the town remained tense, the streets quieter than usual as neighbors processed the shock of what had occurred. The teen was in the hospital, recovering from serious injuries that would leave lasting physical and emotional scars. His body bore the marks of the crash, bruises, cuts, and broken bones, but the deeper wounds were those of guilt and fear. The realization of what his impulsive actions had caused began to settle in, a heavy weight pressing down with every thought. The bystander, too, faced a long road to recovery, with injuries so severe that even the simplest movements became challenges. Families, friends, and neighbors were forced to confront the fragility of life and the devastating consequences of one reckless decision. Law enforcement conducted a thorough investigation, piecing together footage from security cameras, traffic monitors, and eyewitness accounts. Each detail confirmed the escalating recklessness of the pursuit and painted a picture of how quickly ordinary streets had turned into a landscape of danger. The teen faced multiple charges: carjacking, reckless endangerment, and vehicular assault, each carrying significant legal consequences. Court proceedings were scheduled, and the community followed the story closely, discussing the case in quiet tones at local gatherings and online forums. People debated what could have been done differently, reflecting on the chain of events that had led to a preventable tragedy. In schools, conversations shifted to lessons about responsibility, peer pressure, and the consequences of impulsive behavior. Teachers spoke to students about the dangers of thrill-seeking and the importance of thinking through decisions before acting. The teen's story became a cautionary tale, a concrete example of how a single act could ripple outward and affect countless lives. Parents warned children about the unpredictability of high-speed pursuits, while community leaders worked to reassure residents that measures would be taken to prevent similar incidents in the future. The emotional toll on the community was profound. Residents who had witnessed the chase or its aftermath struggled with feelings of fear and helplessness. Some were haunted by the memory of the spinning sedan, the sound of breaking glass, or the sight of the lamppost bent under the impact. Conversations in homes, cafes, and workplaces often returned to the incident, each retelling a reminder of how quickly life could change. Counseling services were made available, and support groups formed for those directly affected, particularly the family of the injured bystander. Over time, the teen began to understand the full scope of his actions. He faced the reality that his desire for thrill and defiance had caused not just his own suffering, but also the pain of innocent people. While legal consequences loomed, the emotional weight of responsibility remained his constant companion. The bystander, despite ongoing medical challenges, showed resilience, reminding the community of the fragile yet enduring strength of the human spirit. The town slowly returned to routine, but the memory of that day lingered, a stark reminder of the fine line between choice and consequence, thrill and tragedy. The events became part of the town's history, a story retold as a warning and a lesson, ensuring that the impact of one impulsive act would not be forgotten.